this is the 6th episode of Hammercircuit. We would like to start this with a disclaimer saying that the content in this episode might seem a little bit extreme, radical, or a little bit experimental in origin. So.
Right. This is just our own opinions and what we think. The topic today is over societal decay and our definitions of it and what's fueling societal decay. Would you just like to give a brief summary of what we think of this?
So, what I think of societal decay and what I've been saying over the past couple of years is that with the rise of the internet, social media, technology in general, is that first off, societies have become bigger, as in like one society in Europe can communicate with another society within America, spreading ideas across the world. Not only that, within our own nation, we have the rise of very progressive movements that we always see ideas being challenged. And what's happening is that slowly over time, we're becoming a lot more different than the person right next to us.
Right. Really what I see is I'm going to use the word liberal to try to describe this because I don't know what other word to use. When I say liberal, what we mean by that is somebody who challenges traditional viewpoints or a movement that is challenging traditional viewpoints. And what we see is throughout in our society and all throughout history is that typically there are conservative principles that really bind society together. Principles in this case are two people getting married and then having a kid, staying together, and then raising that kid, right?
And there are certain reasons why those principles that govern certain societies just tend to stay or stick over a long period of time. And it's usually because that way of living just worked in that society.
Yeah, not just it works in that society. It tends to work out in all societies. The basic principles, and there's some parts of it that I disagree with, but there's other parts that you can agree behind that they work. And I'll give you an example of this. With two people getting married, staying together, and having a kid, raising that kid together. The reason why that works is because whenever you try to stray away from that, whenever there's the liberal movement pushing away from that idea and trying to become more progressive, society ends up decaying. And you can see this happen with the Romans. You can see it happen with the Greeks. Most recently, what happened was with the Russians in the early 20th century. A little historical background behind that. In 1917, the Bolsheviks, which is the Communist Party, they seized power. In bigamy, incest, adultery, they were all removed from the official list of crime, meaning it was legal to have sex with your sister. Like, that was a legal thing.
After the Bolsheviks?
Yes, after the Bolsheviks seized power in 1917, because one of the parts of communism was free love. That was a concept that was driven through communism. But here's what ended up happening. There was these people called alpha widows and alpha males. Now, the alpha males would have sex with the alpha widows, and the problem is that they wouldn't be married when they would have sex. They wouldn't. The man wouldn't stick in the relationship to help raise the kid. So all these women got pregnant, and they had nobody to have people to provide resources for them because it takes resources.
Another thing is that while they were pregnant, they were out of work, and no one else was supporting them except possibly their family.
Right. If they were lucky, their family would. But in a nutshell, they would need government resources in order to do that. So the government opened up orphanages and child care facilities, which is basically just the state saying, we're willing to raise your kid if you should otherwise be preoccupied. So the orphanages, of course, were overcrowded, they were underfunded, and they ended up horrible. By 1922, there was over 7 million children on the streets of Russia. And this is plausibly the reason why such strict rules and conservative values developed, because without them, it ends up in that scenario. Ultimately, what ended up happening was birth rates dropped really quickly. Abortions became a very frequent practice, and society began to decay. So after Lenin died and there was the power vacuum, Stalin seized power, as we all know, and Stalin ended up by the early 30s. He made sure that marriage was brought back again. He made it illegal to pretty much have kids without getting married. He forced people to recognize their marriage through the state and such, and he would reward people who would have a lot of kids and would stay married. So he brought back the conservative values, which we often see what happens throughout history. So there's a conservative backlash, and that was the conservative backlash with Russia.
And to further add to Carter's point is that you usually see this in several civilizations, like through the rise and fall of them. And I mean, one good example that Carter gave was the Roman Empire. You know, first it was united, and then over time, with the introduction of certain ideologies such as like Christianity, for example, the empire just started falling apart.
Right. Different mindsets and such. The more liberal, and remember when we say that, challenging traditional viewpoints of society, that's what we mean by liberal.
That's our definition we're going to be using.
Exactly. So what we're seeing with our social decay, the social decay that's been occurring, currently what it is, a lot of it comes with the concept behind free love and such, which, as we just pointed out through the communist example, it didn't work. It ended up failing. So why should we try it again? Why should we just make a photocopy? Why should we reinvent the wheel? What are we doing right now? We're pushing the ideals behind social decay when it's proven that these ideals don't work. Getting married and staying together and having your kid and raising your kid together is proven to work better. So then what are we doing exactly? That's a problem. Like, what do you think, Michael? Like, what can you do to even...
The issue of civilization is that, at least what I think, you're always going to have people who are contrary to the authoritative rule. Even if it's not totalitarian, regardless of any government, you're going to always have people who speak out against it. Some of them are going to have opinions and arguments that actually make sense. Some may not actually be governed by logic. The government has to make sure a certain majority of the people agree with what the government's doing, or they risk the fact that they could be overthrown, basically. And the government would definitely not want that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, as certain new ideas spread, if they spread to a certain threshold, I mean, honestly, what happens is the government has no choice but to kneel down and bow down to the new idea.
Right. Which you see happening, like, you see there's the platform for change and changing traditional viewpoints. The problem with that platform is oftentimes it is opened up to all ideas and ideologies and thoughts, which can be positive in some ways, but in other ways it can be very toxic because people who are suggesting things that are absolutely absurd put their ideas on the table and they push for them up until they get accepted. An example of this is with bestiality. In Canada, bestiality is legal. I don't know all the details about how it became legalized, but there had to be a platform of debate, which is crazy to even think about to me. That's hilarious for me to think about, that politicians in some room were talking with one another saying, okay, so today's meeting is about legalizing bestiality, and they talked about that. Does that just blow your mind?
Yeah, it does, because it's not necessarily a biological natural thing, and I'm pretty sure it's not benefiting the animal in any way possibly, but the issue with that is that how is me and Carter supposed to be like knowing if it's right or wrong? Well, we can't really say, but like we just know that from a logical and scientific perspective, it's not natural. So why should something natural become a norm of today's society?
Right. And that's a part of the social decay that is eventually going to happen with Canada, I'd imagine, because if the state is talking, even has the conversation about why they should legalize bestiality, they didn't just have the conversation, they went about legalizing it. The fact that it's legal, well, chances are if someone's, doing something to an animal, they're not doing it, people who were doing things to animals before it was legalized were going to do it anyway, and just because it was legalized, it doesn't necessarily mean that new people are going to start.
So wouldn't that just really mean that it's more or less a statement towards a certain thing?
Exactly.
And it would let people do more stuff that's a lot more extreme and expect that they can get away with it?
Basically, if you consider these ideas like a pendulum, where there's the new ideas that are swinging and changing and straying away from the conservative values. The issue isn't that there's people now allowed to screw animals, because if it was like strictly enforced that's illegal to do something to an animal like that, there's going to be people doing it anyway. That's just how most things work. It's kind of like with prohibition. You put in prohibition and there's still people brewing alcohol and still people drinking alcohol. There's just because something is illegal doesn't mean that people don't do it. The issue is that the government has officially recognized, and it's almost a statement, that they have strayed away from every single traditional value that was upheld in Canada. Because before they'd say, we support traditional marriage, traditional relationships and such. Now we are completely willing to support people screwing animals. Well, what else are they going to go next to? Now, I would say things like incest and pedophilia. I've already seen several videos and websites create a platform that justifies pedophilia.
But any scientist is gonna say, like, it's just wrong. You can't justify. Well, pedophilia is just historically ethics wise, and ethics. I mean, we've seen that it is a subjective thing depending on from culture to culture and country to country. But
if you look at it from a scientific view, though, a child cannot consent properly because their brain isn't fully developed yet. Not only is their brain not fully developed, it doesn't benefit a child to have sex with them. It just doesn't. They don't know.
The child doesn't know what they want. They don't even know what they want to do in life.
I don't know. When I was a kid, I wanted to be like a pirate when I grew up. The reason why it's funny to have those events where you ask the kindergartners what they want to be when they grow up is because they say things that are completely ridiculous. I want to be a pirate. I want to be an animal catcher. They say these things that are just unrealistic. I wanted to be an animal catcher. It wasn't even a zoologist, it was just an animal catcher. That was my official title that I chose. And it doesn't mean anything because what kids say changes day by day, minute by minute, because kids don't have fully developed brains, ergo they can't consent to things.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And that's just a really, really extreme example as well. I really hope that won't even occur.
I wouldn't even say that this is too extreme, because if you look at the things historically, in the Roman times, eventually that was legalized in Rome. The liberal values, I wouldn't say liberal values, but the liberal ideals really kept straying away from conservative values that kept going further and further and further. And it's like they take one step at a time up until all the conservative values are dead.
Here's something that not all conservative values are correct, not all liberal values are correct. It's just that liberal values aren't necessarily correct if they completely are not to anybody's benefit, Pedophilia, incest, bestiality, that's just adhering to completely unnatural, not healthy behaviors.
Yeah, you ask yourself this question. A liberal ideal is welfare, right? Well, you can make an argument as to how that benefits society. We support that debate, but there can be no platform of debate for why bestiality should be legalized or why pedophilia should be legalized, because you can ask yourself this question: how would it benefit society if somebody's screwing a child or screwing a dog? The answer is it doesn't. It does the exact opposite. Well, if it does the exact opposite, there should be measures taken to prevent it rather than make it something legal. You see the point? So if you can ask yourself the question, does this help society? And if the answer is maybe or yes, then that's something that should be debated and talked about, right? If not, it should probably just be destroyed. Or
the main issue is that given how large society has become and how interconnected it is, these small minorities within each region that is the world now make up can spread their ideals and potentially twisted values almost anywhere, to any country, to any person. And the thing is that when these ideas are spread, some people hold the belief that what they look at the internet, and it is a thing that occurs, is that what they look at the internet is true. Not everything you see, and a lot of people try to hammer this point down, is that not everything you see on the internet is true. I know it's a meme, but some people forget about that and don't actually know that. Because the thing is that if you accidentally sidetrack into a part of the internet and you don't know the before or after, you're getting sent information, like, how can the person make a sound decision if that's the only information they're being fed? I mean, another example of this could be, and this is the extreme example of this, but Nazi propaganda. You're being fed one stream of information, and it's coming from the most popular political party.
Right. And it becomes an issue because I know we were talking about the conservative values, or at least not like the conservative values of America, but just the values that we can find universal among cultures that bind us together, when the values that bind you together or bind some people together are the crazy ideas pushed to you on the internet. And although that was it is an extreme example, I guess you could say, with the Nazi propaganda, if somebody's just like binding together over some type of propaganda, or I wouldn't even describe it as propaganda, some ideology or idea, if you're being binded together by some crazy ideology or toxic one, that's really not healthy for the individual or the society, So
I think I've started like advocating for this a lot, is that you need to find some way that whatever you see on the internet or whatever you see in general, you always look for the opposite statement, and you always see what the justification is for the opposite statement.
Yeah, keeping things fair, because it's really easy to believe in something without hearing the challenging opinion, because if you're only hearing from one side, you just believe in the one side without looking at the other, you could be believing something that's it's just completely fabricated or false or whatever.
And that one side that may be fabricated or false, they will, and since you didn't look at the other side, they will immediately discredit the other side. Basically, they will accuse the other side for oppressing them and stuff.
Right.
And we're not trying to. Now, we're only naming extreme examples because, like, there are other examples, but I mean, some of them actually have moderate justifications that aren't necessarily extreme. Pedophilia, incest, bestiality, those are just naturally extreme in nature, basically.
Right. They sound they're extreme in nature, but the actual truth is that they're trying to push some of these ideas are trying to be pushed up until they become normal. I get this isn't necessarily relating to what you were just saying, but is that not just shocking to you that screwing dogs is trying to be pushed into normalization.
It's really hard to wrap my head around.
It's sickening. It makes me want to throw up. It makes me want to puke. I'll put it like this. I said this to Michael earlier. If you hear something and the first thought in your head is Joseph Stalin, I wish I lived in the USSR under Joseph Stalin. If your first thought is that after seeing something, what you're seeing is screwed up. When you see that bestiality is legal in Canada, it's legal to screw a dog. If the first thought, when you want to live in the USSR because screwing dogs was legalized, something wrong is happening. There's something gross going on.
Right.
If that's not social decay, I don't know what is social decay.
So like, pulling out of this really specific example, yeah, social decay, it's happening. I mean, you can, like, you feel free to deny it and feel free to agree.
No, just go to Canada.
But like,
and just look at what's going on.
Do your research. Just look at all the changes that's happened over the past 100 years regarding, culture and stuff. Culture just changes over time, and it's just every single time when a new thing happens, the older generation or the generation that is used to the old way of living has to slowly change. But the thing is that sometimes the new counter generation, they'll realize the error, or they'll learn when to stop. This doesn't usually always happen, but I think a good example of this was the 60s, I think, right? Well, with it was the counterculture with it was like the LSD, all that stuff.
The hippies,
right?
What you call the hippies.
There's a lot of ex-hippies who are, they're off drugs and they're working regular jobs. And the reason is that they realized that, well, the hippie movement, I guess, never got so big that it was just widely adopted. But the hippies realized that they can't live their whole entire lives this way. They need to be able to sustain themselves, and the way they had to adhere to society that was backing away from them, not the other way around. But I think there was some sort of flip that, now it's the other way around, that there's these movements that keep springing up, and they always gain more and more. And I mean, it's never like exactly a 50-50, but there is a little bit of a appeasement when it comes to something like that happening in Canada.
Yeah. And think about it like this. This is something that Barack Obama says. He says, do you want to be on the wrong side of history? Meaning, and here's what I think he means by this. I think what he means by it is, when kids are reading about this in history books, what are they going to think? Are they going to think, wow, what heroes? Like, are they going to think of us as the way that we think about the greatest generation? American soldiers storming Normandy Beach to try to fight fascism. Are they going to think of it the same way that we think of that when they consider what we're doing right now?
And like, we're swinging on the pendulum like left and right on this, but like, what we're really trying to say is that, like, I want to use a really, and it's going to sound super conservative and scientific and stuff, but I'm going to use the example of bacteria, okay? So, and this has to do with, and we're humans, bacteria is also organic, we're organic, so we can kind of link them two together.
Biological,
yes. You have one bacteria cell, okay? It splits. They're both equal. They both have basically the same traits. They split again. 100 iterations down the line. Now we have 100 squared, or no, 2 to the 100th bacteria, right? Am I doing my math right on this?
I think so.
So, what's happening is that we started with one bacteria cell, and it had all these traits, all these principles it lived by, right? Mm-hmm. After the 100th iteration, or let's say 100 years, like let's say it's just a single bacteria or whatever, as the iterations continued, there were always these small mutations, or in the today's society's terms, a societal variance that would occur in each bacteria, and at first that would be small, but at around the 100th or 200th iteration, you would have several bacteria with a large variance compared to other bacteria next to it. Because the larger the sample size, or the more times something is duplicated, think of a photocopying machine, the more malformed or the less detail some things become. So what I'm trying to say with this is that you look at something like society, and guess what humans also do? They reproduce. You know what also happens? People's ideas vary. You know, every single iteration, the ideas vary more and more and more. And these people who have maybe these things can be corrected so they can still fit in society. They're more likely to swing all the way to a really new idea, and they might just be against what the old viewpoint was entirely.
The more variances there are, the more new ideas that there are pushing against the conservative values of the society. And it gets to the point where conservative values now might be completely different to what are considered conservative values 100 years from now, or even 20 years from now.
And to put it in another way, and it's more of a humor way, is that you look at me and Carter, for example. Something I talk to Carter a lot about is there's a good kind of crazy and a bad kind of crazy. The stuff that and this is mostly globally accepted, the stuff that Nazi scientists did, that was a bad kind of crazy. And then there's a good kind of crazy where me and Carter are like looking at our high school, and we're saying, you know, we don't actually have to just sit around in high schools and just let all the stuff they're teaching us come in and just go onto the paper and just let it, you know, we don't have to just listen to what the high school teaches us. We can go ahead and make our own decisions, start working, teaching ourselves what we want to do, and not just have the high school, for example, teach us general education. So when we come out of high school, we're clueless about what we want to do. We've already experimented. We already know what we want to do, for example.
Mm-hmm. Which is really useful for us. I don't want to go off on a tangent about that, though.
But that is like a positive variance.
Yeah, it's a good.
We've broken away from.
It's not necessarily a crazy, I'd say. Like,
right.
It's
but
more
it's
of
still,
a variance.
It's still a variance. We've broken away.
I wouldn't use crazy
bit
as a way to describe. I'd say variances.
Yeah.
Like, there's the crazy variances and there's the bad variances, which are like the crazy Nazi scientists. Then there's the good variances where it's like, oh, I don't want to follow the traditional education system. I want to follow an education system that will benefit us in a far better way. So,
and the thing is that there are some variances in society, and they exist, and they're just genuine, and they're like, I feel like this is the way I feel, and this is what makes me feel happy, and I know that it doesn't hurt anybody in the process. That type of push for change, that's okay, right? It's when it happens where it actually does hurt people, and it's insulting the people who don't agree with that idea. That's when it becomes extreme and radical, and when people are hurt in the process, that is a bad negative variance.
Yeah, we'll put it like this. If the idea that you have is going to hurt another person through force, or hurt society forcefully, then it should not be enacted.
And what the societal decay really means is that positive variance is positive. It helps society grow and change in a positive manner. Helps it develop. It helps the human race develop as a species. A negative variance, on the other hand, hurts society, makes it more different, and makes it where the society is slowly dissolving, and we have to put more effort in to actually keep it together and attached.
Yeah. And ultimately, there really is no solution to the variances because it's inevitable. Humans become more and more different over time. You see this all throughout history. It's inevitable that societies are going to decay, rise up again, decay, and rise up again.
It's just an endless cycle.
Right.
And then the communities that don't keep crashing usually are the ones that just don't look at this. They don't look at the variance. They stick with their people who don't vary that much. And this causes, self-segregation and attempts to build just like towns with shared values. One of the ideas that me and Carter joke about and sometimes think about seriously is just like maybe potentially establishing a town or a city that's self-sustaining and it's filled with people who are bright thinkers who want to change tomorrow's world for the better.
Right, it would be an experiment nonetheless to see what would end up happening. We're not going to talk about all the details about that or how it would even be possible. But ultimately, would it be possible to create a society that avoids all social decay? It would have to be small. That would be one requirement. And the closest society I see currently that's achieved this is Switzerland, because Switzerland has really just stayed alone in the Alps all throughout the years, and they've been what's the word? Humanists all throughout the years.
I think, and this is seen. I think our business or personal finance teacher actually showed us this, or maybe it was even in history. But the Switzerland happiness, like Switzerland is apparently one of the happiest countries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think they also have a pretty good cost of living. I think,
right,
or something like that.
One thing about Switzerland is the things are very expensive, but most of the population is middle class. Like an overwhelming majority of the population is middle class. Poverty is like non-existent in Switzerland.
You would have to ask why. So
we know the answer why.
Yeah, but
we would rather not mention that answer though in this podcast.
You guys can go on a journey and find the answer for yourselves.
Just Google Switzerland's relationship with Nazi gold.
Keep in mind, everybody, you're all free to follow your own path. Just, do your own research and just talk with other people. Try to make sure that you're getting everybody's perspective on your decisions and listen to your interior and exterior forces. So that was the 7th episode of Hammercircuit.
I'm Carter.
And I'm Michael.
We'll
see you next time.